And good afternoon, guys, and welcome back to U.S. History 10. We're going to jump back in today. This is our very last lesson. We've got to jump right back into where we left off last week so we can wrap up with our last two standards to get us through industrialization and wrap up to get you guys exactly where you need to be so that you roll into 11th grade history next year. You're ready for the content and you're ready to pick up where we left off this year in 10th grade. So we're going to jump back in real quick, guys, and let's do a brief reminder of where we were last week. We were talking about Reconstruction, and remember what that word means. Reconstruction is the process of rebuilding society following the Civil War. What we're trying to do here at this point in history, we're trying to reconstruct the infrastructure of the South, but at the same time, we're trying to acclimate African Americans into American society. There's several important acts or amendments that we talked about last week that afforded rights to African Americans, such as the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment that offered them rights as citizens of the United States, and then finally the 15th Amendment that offered African American males the right to vote. Now that African Americans are being acclimated into this new society, you have to think about generations of African Americans have been oppressed in the institution of slavery. Now they're trying to make a place for themselves in society. Many have left plantations. They're trying to find a life for themselves. And what we need to do first is look at some of the challenges that we're facing African Americans as they move into this new role as citizens of the United States. So building a new life for themselves, like I said, one of the biggest things that's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of new won freedoms for many of these African Americans, and they're going to try to test those freedoms. These individuals that were formerly enslaved, they were not allowed to marry, they were not allowed to get educations, and those are the things that these individuals want to attain for themselves. Families had been broken up. People married, if we want to say it that way, on plantations. There was nothing legal about these marriages. And a lot of times these families were split apart. They were broken up during the institution of slavery. These individuals want to come back. They want to come back, bring their families back together, and make themselves whole. And that's what many are going to do for a while, is try to reunite their families to try to start that normal life for themselves. Now again, education had not been afforded to many African Americans. As we progressed through the 1800s, laws actually became very strict about educating African Americans. So many of them, of course, if they were enslaved, they were not allowed the right to learn how to read or write, because you have to remember, if you know how to read or write, what does that give you? That gives you knowledge. That's going to give you the opportunity to think about the situation that you're in and possibly get out of that situation. And that's what people were trying to repress. So education is something that was always barred from African Americans in the institution of slavery. So one of the big things that we're going to see at this point, we're going to see in the late 1860s, early 1870s, is a growth in African American schools. Not only are we going to see a growth in these African American schools, but we're also going to see a growth in churches. Even before the Civil War, African American churches started forming. You guys talked about the AME churches earlier on in the semester. These churches are going to grow exponentially during this time period now that these individuals have the rights and the freedom to actually practice their religion the way that they want to. But the thing about the churches, they're not just social gathering places. These become spiritual outlet places. These are going to be social outlets as well. Individuals will come to and anybody that is a part of a religious institution probably understands that. You don't just go to church for the religious aspect of it. A lot of times you go for social aspects as well. So they're going to come together and they're going to gather, and this is what's going to help the spread of information and ideas. And the churches really become a support systems for African Americans as they progress through this new lifestyle of being free post-slavery. Now, another big shift that we're going to see in the African American community at this point is African Americans being involved in politics. Now that they have the rights to be citizens of the United States, now that they have the right to African American males have the right to vote, we're going to see more and more of these individuals becoming involved in politics. It's going to be a tough road to start off with, but by the time between 1865 and 1877, we're going to have many African American males holding office at all levels of government, from local, state, all the way up to the federal government. And one great example of this is a gentleman named Hiram Revels. Hiram Revels was the first black senator. He was actually from the state of Mississippi, which is kind of crazy to think about in the middle of Reconstruction, that this African American man is able to rise to the place of a senator in his state. And you'll see why here in just a little bit, why that was able to play out. But this is not going to be something that's going to dominate American politics, because there's always going to be this group, not just one specific group, but individuals that come together that kind of are part of this major group of people in the United States that still want to suppress African Americans. And it's going to be hard for them to make strides. And they're going to do some positive strides in politics. But there's always going to be people that are trying to push them back to prevent them from gaining any type of power in American politics. And one of the biggest groups that we see emerge at this point is a group called the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. Many of you have probably heard of this group before, you're familiar with it, and their garments that they wore, their robes, their hoods that they would use to scare and intimidate people. And essentially what happened with the KKK, or where it came out of, is a means of suppressing African American rights. They were trying to essentially punish African Americans for their new won freedoms, but also at the same time restore white supremacy. And we'll see resurgences of the KKK throughout American history. We see a real big insurgence through Reconstruction, and then once their goals are met at the end of Reconstruction, we'll see that in a few minutes, you see the KKK die down. We see immigration in the 1920s, we see a rise. We see the civil rights movement in the 1960s, we see a rise again in the KKK. So they kind of come and go throughout American history, but it's always about this idea of white supremacy and suppressing rights. And this is where it emerges here during the post-Civil War era. And again, they're gonna make a name for themselves in the South, and you're gonna see as we progress through this, not only how the KKK is gonna suppress the rights of African Americans, but other individuals that want to assert their dominance back in the South, because of course that dominance was taken away as a result of the Civil War. Now, one of the things before we move forward, guys, I want to talk about this chart here and talk about school enrollment. If we look at this enrollment, guys, you'll see how exponentially the African American population is going to grow within school populations. You can see in the 1850s, nearly, dropping my clicker there. You can see that there's about nearly 0% of African Americans that are actually enrolled in school. But if you look, by the time that we get to the 1880s, we're almost over 30% of African Americans are enrolled in school. Doesn't seem like a very staggering number at this point in time considering, but it does show that growth and that change that's going to happen as a result of these new won freedoms. All right. So to finish up with Reconstruction, guys, we've got two more things to talk about the Reconstruction. Let's talk about the collapse of Reconstruction. Then we're going to talk about the election of 1876 that's going to end Reconstruction completely at that point. Now, by the time that we get to the early 1870s, we're starting to see a lot of pushback and a lot of opposition to Reconstruction. A lot of these former Confederates, they're wanting to gain their right to vote. A lot of Confederate officers had actually lost their right to vote during Reconstruction, and they wanted that right back. They wanted the ability to have a voice in their government again. So you're going to start to see these shifts in power in the South, where you start to see Democrats, former Confederates, start to take more control over the government, and the Republicans that had gained some ground in the South were starting to lose that hold in the South as Reconstruction starts to crumble. You've got to remember, it's the Republicans, and especially the radical Republicans, that were making a lot of these big pushes for legislation in the South and changes in the South to help African Americans. And you're going to see over time, as the Democrats gain more control, as individuals that have been pushed out of control are taken and put back into control, you're going to see changes obviously made within the government. Now, another problem, too, that we see here, guys, is the Republican Party losing a lot of power and losing a lot of influence. Ulysses S. Grant, his 2 terms as president were marred by political scandal. The party was divided. The thing about Grant, though, it wasn't Grant that was scandalous. It was the people that are around him, his administrators, the people that were working within his cabinet. They were the ones that were corrupt. He was a little naive sometimes, trusted people a little bit too much in his government to make decisions. And what's going to happen here is that's going to lead to a lot of corruption and lead to really a lot of people pulling away from the Republican Party because they don't know if they can trust the Republican Party after all of these scandals that have happened within the Grant administration. I wish we had time to go into some of those scandals, but unfortunately we don't. Now, another problem is the Panic of 1873. This is going to hit the administration hard. And what this is, guys, this is a financial panic. We have collapses of banks. The economy is going to collapse. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But anytime that we see a an economic downturn, we're going to see someone blamed for that. And typically it's the person leading the country at the time. And of course, that's Ulysses S. Grant at this point. And even with that, not only do we have financial problems going on, we've got scandal within the administration, a lot of people within the North, they're starting to lose patience with efforts in the South. We're trying to reconstruct, make the South whole again, part of the United States, make it a pure union again. But the problem is we're starting to see that the government's pushing more towards imposing moral and social changes, and that's not something necessarily that the government can do. That's something that has to happen within the population socially. The government can't force people to think a certain way morally. So that's one of the reasons why the North is like, we've got to step away from this because we're not making any ground here. And another problem, too, is that by the time that we get to 1869 through about 1865, as we head towards the end of Reconstruction, the Democrats, they're, again, starting to recapture the South. A lot of these former Confederates are coming back into power. And what we're going to see here is something called redemption being achieved, okay? This is a term that they used towards the end of Reconstruction to signify the fact that Southern Democrats had taken back over the political scene in the South. They had control again, and the Democrats in the South will control the majority of that power until we get into the 1960s. A lot of my students always ask, they're a little confused, they're like, well, hold up, wait, Democrats are dominant in the South during this time period? Absolutely. During the 1960s, you'll still see a flip-flopping in power within the Republican and Democratic Party. It's a little complicated, but you're going to see that flip-flop. People that were formerly Democrats will shift over to the Republican Party because of some of the things happening during the Civil Rights Movement. So if that seemed a little confusing to you, that's one of the reasons why, because that shift will be made about 100 years later. Now, redemption is achieved in the South, and that's what's going to lead to the end of Reconstruction, guys. Now, this is going to be the nail in the coffin here for Reconstruction. It's going to be the election of 1876. So let's talk about this election and why does this lead to the end of Reconstruction? Well, what we see here, guys, let's talk about the guys that are the two gentlemen that are running for the presidency at this point. So Ulysses S. Grant in 1876 decides not to run for re-election because of the scandals in his administration. He decides not to run again. So we're going to see the governor of New York, Rutherford B. Hayes, is a Republican, is going to run against the Democrat Samuel J. Tilden. Well, when the election plays out and we get the results back, Tilden actually wins the popular vote, but he's actually only one vote shy of the electoral vote. Remember, the Electoral College, that's what's going to determine the presidency. The popular vote doesn't necessarily determine it. It's going to be the Electoral College vote. But when they start to look at the results of this election, there were about 20 of those electoral results that were disputed that were coming out of the states and the states conventions. The states, of course, conventions for counting these votes or the electoral conventions. So what we're seeing here, guys, is disputed votes. And who's really the president? Was it really Tilden? Did he really win? Is it Hayes that wins? And to work this out, to figure out who actually is going to win this election, this isn't the first time this has happened in a presidential election where it was so close and a compromise had to be made, or, of course, decisions had to be made in order to determine who was the winner in this. Now, in 1877, the way that they're going to decide this is they're going to have a compromise. We talked a lot of compromises for in American history, and this compromise is going to make Rutherford B. Hayes the president. He didn't get all the Electoral College votes. He didn't win the popular vote. How does he win? Well, the Democrats are going to concede because there's some things that the Democrats want. Okay, we're not going to get the presidency, but there's some things that we're going to get that's going to gain us power in the South, and that's what we're going to try to do with this, of course, this compromise. So what did the Democrats actually get out of this? One, they're going to get the federal troops pulled out of Louisiana and South Carolina. Those were the two holdout states. That's where the federal troops were still there. They had pretty much control of the government in Louisiana and South Carolina. And the Southern Democrats wanted, of course, everyone out. They wanted the federal government out of the South so the South could have, of course, their territory again. And another thing they're going to do is make sure that there's a conservative Southerner in the president's cabinet. You have to remember the cabinet is the president's closest advisors. They're, of course, his closest confidants when it comes to things that are going to happen with the government. So if we put a conservative Southerner in this position, he might have some influence on the president, and that Democratic voice is still heard within the president's cabinet, and that's a pretty big voice to be heard at that point. So yeah, the Democrats lose this election, but they do have a lot to gain here. And guys, this is what's going to lead to the end of Reconstruction. All the troops were removed from the South. The South essentially has control over their states and local governments again. Former Confederates are back in power. So we're going to see this shift that's going to, of course, change the way that government is, of course, constructed and, of course, facilitated in the South. Excuse me, guys. The big thing to remember about all of this is with the collapse of Reconstruction, that's what's going to lead to a lot of loss of freedoms for many of these African Americans that had been gained during Reconstruction. And that's the last thing that I want to hit about Reconstruction before we move into industrialization, is talk about a court case that happens about 20 years post the end of Reconstruction, and that's a court case called Plessy versus Ferguson. Homer Plessy was a gentleman, lived in Covington, Louisiana, and he wanted to take a train from Covington, Louisiana to New Orleans. Covington is across the Lake Pontchartrain, so you take the train to the city of New Orleans. And back then, that was the quickest route to get to the city of New Orleans. So he buys a train ticket, gets on the train, and when he gets on the train, he's asked to move. He's sitting in the white car. There were segregated cars at that point, but he's asked to move, and he doesn't feel like he should. When you looked at Homer Plessy appearance, he looks white. You would have guessed he was a white man, but he was actually 1/8 African American. One of his great-grandparents was African American, and because he was 1/8 African American, he was deemed an African American in the South. So they wanted him to go to the segregated car. He refused. He said it was infringement upon his rights as an American citizen. This court case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and in 1896, the Supreme Court deems that it's okay to have separate cars. There's okay to have separate restaurants, pools, bathrooms, whatever else for African Americans as long as they were equal. This is what we call separate but equal, guys. It legalizes segregation in the United States. This single court case for nearly 60 years basically destroys everything that took place within Reconstruction. No longer do African Americans have the right to go where they want to and do what they please. They're going to be very restricted what they can and cannot do. And then when we get to the 1950s, we're going to see a court case called Brown versus the Board of Education, which many of you have probably heard of before, that actually makes legal segregation illegal. That is what's going to end legal segregation, going to lead to the desegregation of schools and a lot of changes here. But if you wanted to know why did we have segregated schools in the first place, this court case does it, but it also leads to a lot of segregation in other public facilities. So guys, that's Reconstruction. Positive things will happen during Reconstruction, like I said, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But again, as Reconstruction fades in the South, and of course, we see court cases like Plessy versus Ferguson come in, a lot of these rights of African Americans are going to be infringed upon, and it's going to lead to another battle, of course, that's going to culminate in the 1950s and 60s with the Civil Rights Movement. All right, so we're going to step out of Reconstruction, and what we're going to do real quick for the last few minutes that we have, guys, is talk about what is going on in America when it comes to business, when it comes to agriculture over the next 20-odd years as we lead into the beginning of the 20th century. Well, the big thing that's going to change American society as we move into the era leading into the 20th century is going to be the Second Industrial Revolution. If you remember back from the early 1800s, we had the First Industrial Revolution. Now we're going to go through a second wave of Industrial Revolution. And one of the innovators of this, guys, that we've got to thank is this gentleman right here. This is Thomas Edison. So when we get to post-Reconstruction, America saw a renewed interest in business and the development of electricity. That's what's really going to lead to growth in this industry. Why? Why is that so important? Well, Thomas Edison was an inventor. You've probably heard of Edison before. We know him for the light bulb. But remember, if you want the light bulb, you've got to be able to actually power that light bulb. And the most important thing that Edison's going to do, not only does he perfect the incandescent light bulb, he's also going to figure out the system to actually send out power to the world. He's going to set up power stations and learn how to disseminate that out to other places so that everybody can have electricity. And you have to remember that before the Industrial Revolution, how were factories ran? Factories were ran by water. They were placed by rivers. You'd have a massive wheel that would run all the, of course, gears in there and run all the machines. Now that you have electricity to run all that, you can move industry everywhere and industry is going to grow. Now, big government's going to become involved in big business. You're going to start to see industrial growth, more government involvement in business, and that's going to lead to the regulation of industries. That's going to mean more opportunities for competition in business, and industry is really going to grow as a result of that. Now, another thing too, guys, we're going to see a shift, of course, when it comes to agriculture. We say that we're shifting from an agrarian to an industrial society. We're shifting from a farming society into an industrial society. But farming becomes high-tech during this time period as well. So very quickly, let's talk about industrialization and what that does to farming. One thing it does, it provides better equipment. This equipment means more efficiency in production. As you can see from this picture here, you've got mechanical reapers. That's going to allow for less people actually working in the fields. So less people working in the fields, that's going to mean more people available to work in industrial jobs. But another thing too, once we get to the point of the railroad, we have better transportation of food stuff. Things can be grown in the west. They can be shipped back to the east in box cars that are moving much more efficiently than, of course, a horse and buggy would. We're not quite to the mass transportation of cars yet, 1880s, and we start to see that emerge, but the railroad is going to be helpful in facilitating that. And we're also going to see too, with this more tech, we have the less need for workers. And like I said a moment ago, more workers available, more will flood into the industrial fields. So to wrap this up, we got a little bit more, guys. Let's talk about the growth in cities with industrialization. So we start to see mass immigration during the late 1800s, and with immigration and also industrialization, that's going to lead to a growth in urban areas. Workers flood to the cities looking for work, and it's going to create very unbearable conditions in these cities. And what's going to happen here, guys, is we're going to start to see this innovation and this growth lead to changes in these cities. It actually leads to a lot of positive things. We're going to see revolutions in steel. These steel beams, this new ability to produce steel cheaply is going to lead to a growth in things like skyscrapers. The picture here, guys, is actually the very first skyscraper that was created. It's the Home Securities Insurance Company. It was created in the late 1880s in Chicago. It's kind of crazy because we look at both these pictures, you'd probably think New York. This is actually Chicago, Illinois at this point in time. You're going to see cities grow as a result of steel. It's going to grow upwards because cities can't grow outward. But as cities start to grow and become more crowded, we see the need for more sanitary conditions. We see the need to clean up cities. And we see the need, of course, for the improvement of life within these cities. It's very crowded. It's very gross with the influx of urbanization. So we're going to see sanitation commissions come in and clean up these cities. We're going to see a guy named Jacob Riis. He's one of the real innovators here. He's a photographer, and he figured out how to take pictures at night in a lot of these slums where a lot of these immigrants were living. And people are just blown away by what they're seeing. And people start to make pushes for changes in these urban areas. And that's when we start to see improvement in these urban areas and improvement in, of course, a quality of life, improvement of life. Now, guys, I would love to go through Carnegie and Rockefeller with you guys, two of the biggest magnets when it comes to industry at this point. But to finish this up for today, guys, we do have our question of the lesson. We only got a little bit of time left, and I wanted to make sure before we wrap this up today, guys, I wanted to show you the question for today so you can have a chance to answer this question and possibly get it right to get a free t-shirt or possibly for free Chick-fil-A. So if you paid attention to the lesson today, here's your question, and I'm going to give you the instructions for finishing this up. So your question for today, guys, is what court case allowed for legalized segregation in the United States? So what you're going to do for me, guys, you're going to email your answer to MCPSS or mcpsstv@mcps.com. And again, for your chance to win possibly free Chick-fil-A gift card, a free shirt. So make sure that you get that in for me today, guys. Very quickly, I just want to say thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this process for the past 6 weeks. Thank you to Superintendent Threadgill. Thank you to Mrs. Renee Phillips and everybody at the staff here at MCPSS TV for everything that you guys have done for us and for our students in the county. This has been a great time. It's been sad being out of my classroom, but it's been an honor being in this classroom and being with you guys over the past 6 weeks. I hope you've learned a lot out of these lessons. And again, I hope you have a great summer, and I hope to see you guys all in the fall. You have a great rest of your year, guys, and we'll see you soon.